Max?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, thanks for being with us. 3 or 4 issues that I've been working on that I would appreciate your commenting on. Number one, I continue to worry about the growing inequality in wealth and income in this country. We have the absurd situation where the top 1% now owns 38% of the wealth of America. The bottom 60% own 2.3%. In the last recent years, almost all new income went to the top 1%. Now, as part of that, I also worry about concentration of ownership, particularly with what's going on in Wall Street. We bailed out the large financial institutions because they were too big to fail, and yet all 10 of them today are larger than they were when we bailed them out. There is a growing feeling among many economists, including the president of the Dallas Fed, that maybe the time is now to start breaking up these large financial institutions, the top 6 of which have assets equivalent to 2/3 of the GDP of the United States of America. So I'd like you to, in a second, to comment, is now the time to break up large financial institutions which have unbelievable amount of assets and are, in my view, in danger at some point in the future of once again being in a position of having to be bailed out. Issue number 2 deals with the structure of the Fed. Laws that the Fed did not make, but Congress made. As you know, we have 12 regional Feds, reserve banks, which have 9 members each. Many of my colleagues may not even know this, but as a result of congressional law, of the 9 members, 3 come from the financial institutions themselves. 3 others are appointed by the financial institutions, and 3 come from appointments by the Fed. We have had absurd situations where Jamie Dimon, the CEO of the largest financial institution in America, sat on the New York Fed, whose job is supposedly to regulate Wall Street. And many of us think that is the fox guarding the henhouse. I will be reintroducing legislation to end what I consider to be an absurdity of having 6 out of 9 members of regional Feds coming from the financial institutions. The last question that I'd like to ask is the fact that from the end of 2007 until April of 2013, financial institutions have increased the amount of excess reserves held at the Fed from $1.5 billion to more than $1.7 trillion. And one of the reasons why that has occurred is that since 2008, the Fed has provided interest to financial institutions to keep this money at the Fed. So what we see is huge financial institutions parking huge amounts of money at the Fed, getting a small amount of interest. I think it would be much more productive for our economy if that money was out going to small businesses and into the productive economy rather than sitting at the Fed. And the legislation that I am working on would address this problem by prohibiting the Fed from providing interest to banks on their excess reserves and require the Feds to impose a 2% fee on the excess reserves of the largest banks in America, those with more than $50 billion in assets. In other words, to get the money out rather than park it in the Fed. So those are 3 issues that I am working on. I'd love to have your comments on them. Thank you very much.
Well, Senator, on the last one, the amount of excess reserves in the banking system is completely out of control of the banks. The Fed puts those reserves in the system. The banks can pass them around from each other, but the total is just given. They can't do anything about that. It's like a hot potato. It would be the 0.25% interest that we're paying them, which we're doing for technical reasons, is not preventing money from going out to small business or any other business. After all, C&I loans are paying about 4 percentage points now. Prime rates, I think, about 3.5. So if banks can find attractive loans, they're certainly going to make those loans rather than hold the excess reserves. In addition, getting rid of the interest and excess reserves capacity would force us, when we come time to tighten, it would force us to sell assets very quickly and in a very disruptive way instead of using that tool to tighten interest rates and avoid inflation. So it would be very counterproductive. And we can discuss that, I'm sure, at more length.
Yes, breaking up the large banks.
That's a very complex question. I think that many of the suggestions to break them up have either involved relatively small changes or a form of Glass-Steagall. I think Glass-Steagall is not the solution. because, as we saw in the crisis, investment banks and commercial banks separately got into serious trouble. I would support, so I think that we are doing a lot of things which I don't have time to go through Dodd-Frank, through Basel III, through orderly liquidation authority, and other authorities to move in the right direction towards addressing too big to fail. And as I've said, if we don't feel after some additional work here that we have addressed that problem, I would certainly be supportive of additional steps. I think the best direction is probably requiring the largest firms to hold more capital proportionally, and that would force them both to be safer, to have a more even, more level playing field, and if their economic returns didn't justify the higher capital cost, to induce them to break themselves up.
Structure of the Fed. The Fed regional
Structure
Fed.
of the Fed, I'm very open to discussing those with you. I just want to assure you, as strongly as I can, that the primary role of the board members is first to give us market insight, business insight, let us know what's going on in the economy. They're also helpful on some operational issues, but there is a complete and utterly impermeable wall between the board members and any supervisory matter, and I assure you of that, and so there really is no conflict. That being said, I can see why you might want to have different people represented on that board, more union members, for example, and I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to talk about.
Thank you. All time has expired. Representative Paulson.